Good evening and welcome to BronxTalk. Tonight we take a look back at our best shows of the first quarter of 2023. As you might know, we're in our 29th year of BronxTalk on BronxNet, and since our debut in October 1994 as the borough's first ever TV talk show, we are up to show number 1,386. So let's start our look at the first few months of 2023 with one of the most incredible programs that we've ever done. In February, we took BronxTalk on the road to the Bronx Museum for an inside look at Swagger and Tenderness, the remarkable sculptures of Bronx people by John Ahearn and Rigoberto Torres. This piece, produced by BronxNet's Rebecca Hemmick, shot by cameraman George Matos and others, and edited by the talented Yenelcida Diaz, includes a fascinating look at how the lifelike sculptures were actually created. Take a look. One of the themes that you're going to see here is family, and it turns out, and I had no idea, Rigo, this is your family?
Yes, Edwin is...
Okay, well, that's right. We should introduce, ladies and gentlemen, it's Margaret and Edwin.
And this idea came, I decided to cast Edwin and his wife because we were trying to save the pregnancy part. And as a family member he got like 5 kids extra, in his family. So I said, okay, let's do this piece separate, by itself.
And many of the pieces here, which we're going to see, are about family, of your families. We have one we're going to see later of your wife and child, and Rigo's got his whole family around the whole
This
exhibit.
fortune teller that you see behind you, that's also a member of the family.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, they're everywhere.
Yeah.
If you would, John, there's a video that gets shown here at the museum that describes the process.
Yes.
Talk to me about, because I watched it and it's just unbelievable. You took a young man, you placed him on a table, you stuck straws in his nose so he could breathe. Describe that process of how that works.
Well, we were coming out of the 70s period when I thought of Polaroids as the perfect example how to compare what we were doing, because we were making quickie impressions of people.
And so what do? You poured plaster all over him. Describe that whole thing.
Well, once you have the straws in the nose and you have someone is somewhat ready to be covered, you would throw a whole bowl of this pour down over their faces.
Alginate.
And alginate, yes.
Okay.
And yes, and
how long would it have to stay like that?
not too long, like maybe 15, 20 minutes.
So whoever was under there was breathing through a straw.
Yes.
And covered over. Then what would you do? You lift up.
You have a thing we call the mother mold of plaster bandages went on top of that to give it support, so it would hold the shape of this alginate. And then when that's set up, it would see the hands. Imagine this being the cast. The person would sit up, and this would fall away from their face.
And then you would pour something in that mold. Plaster in that mold, and
yes.
that would create the basis for your work.
That would be the basis for the work, yes.
One of the things you see here are her eyes, which are beautiful, and his eyes, you got the color of the eyes. The eyes you do separate because he couldn't have his eyes open.
Yes, exactly, yes. We always encourage people to have their eyes closed.
And the beautiful thing, one of the many beautiful things, the beautiful thing in that video is that you gave it to his mom.
Yes.
And
Juanito. Yes.
Juanito was,
yes.
So now, Rigoberto, you couldn't have had the two of them together and covered them with plaster. And in many of the other ones we're going to see, they're not in position like this where they're just, like a headshot. How do you do that and create the likeness?
The face separate, both for the face separate.
So you did that process with the face?
Yeah. And then the rest was just the way you see it.
And so what is this made of? This is acrylic on plaster.
Yeah.
And you use different materials all the time.
This it has pipes, burlap. It's got a couple other stuff in it to keep it in shape.
Just one step back before we go, because we're going to see many more pieces. John, romance the Bronx a little bit. Let's just talk about, this must be special to have everything that you've done for decades here at the Bronx Museum. Must be exciting.
It's a profound, moving experience for me, and I am so grateful for everyone that you see and all the people that you don't see that worked with us for decades. I'm so grateful that they gave everything they had to us to help us make these pieces.
I'm going to ask you each, for this particular one, what's your favorite thing? I'm going to tell you, we talked about her eyes. We realized that she's pregnant. The pink sneakers drive me crazy. That is, talk about swagger and tenderness. But what do you like?
These hands right
the
here,
hands.
and these hands. I like the two pairs of hands.
And for you?
Same, the hands, yeah. It's
because you see the way that the hand reverses. His hand on top, her hand on top.
We're going to go look at something that I felt like these are the people in my building. So let's go. We'll go to the next spot. So I had said that we were going to go see two people who I said reminded me of people in my building, but we had to make a pit stop because this is one of my friends, one of the Bronx's friends. John, tell us who this is.
This is our dear friend, Joe Conzo, who took the hip hop's baby pictures many decades ago. And he said to me, I think it's time you did my cast. I said, oh, I don't do it on favors like that. He said, but just for me. And I said, well, what have you got? I said, have you got a photograph of yourself that means something to you? He said, there's one I have, which is the first photograph I ever took of myself. And he showed it to me of himself in the mirror.
Looking like this?
Looking exactly identical to this picture, holding it, and it was a black and white photograph. And he had a big afro, and he was only 17 years old.
Did you do the cast of his face, or you did it off of the photograph?
Well, let's speak more intelligently for everybody here, okay? What we're talking about is the photograph is a study that we use for the casting. The casting is always on the face, but we made up this and we gave him a little uplift with the face to give him, 30 years off his life.
I was going to say, he wasn't
right here.
He wasn't 17.
Yes, and Joe brought the exact Minolta camera that he used in the first photograph, and so this really matches it. And I painted it to look black and white for this picture.
Because it came from a black and white photo.
Wait, there's more. On top of that, we asked Joe to loan his very own choice of this cast. So this is from his own home. This is from his private collection.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that underscores, maybe, Rigo, you could talk a little bit about it. Many of these are in collections all over the country, all over the world.
yes.
And they were brought here. For you, what is it like to have them all here in one space? It must be an amazing feeling.
For me, it's like they coming to
visit.
To visit, to part of my family. So.
Have you learned anything from seeing it like in this way? Do you appreciate it more? Or I don't want to put words in your mouth. Tell me.
No,
tell me
I kind of enjoy the way the director made it. Kind of instead of the white wall, blue background, kind of gives it. So it sticks out more.
The way that the museum laid them all out. All right, listen, we're going to go on to the next. Now, the next one is the one that I said reminds me of people I know in my building. So are we ready? We're ready?
Let's do it.
Let's go. More Bronx people in swagger and tenderness. hope you enjoyed that little snippet from what was an incredible show. And I will tell you, being there in person, you really can't believe the lifelike look of those sculptures. And in fact, the show is still taking place at the Bronx Museum. So if you get a chance, the Bronx Museum on the Grand Concourse, check it out, because I can guarantee you will enjoy it, and it'll remind you of your neighbors, the people that we live with in the Bronx all the time. One of the things that really has characterized Bronx Talk over the years is the range. We do a lot of fun things like that, and we also deal with difficult issues. And in January, and you will recall that Tyree Nichols, a 29-year-old black man, was stopped by the Memphis Police Department's Scorpion Unit. Officers pulled Nichols from his car, maced and tasered him, and ultimately beat him to death. This stirred national outrage as yet another incident of police officers killed an unarmed black man. Unfortunately, we've covered this sort of things many times on Bronx Talk. And to analyze what happened and offer solutions in this case, we had race relations expert Dr. Lynne Maureen Hurdle in our studio and pre-recorded an interview with John Jay College of Criminal Justice professor Greg Donaldson. Take a look.
Do you see that really we need to do better job giving kids productive activities? Or because many people say, hey, look, like I think Rudy Giuliani said, midnight basketball doesn't work. I personally disagree. Do you see that as like an ultimate way of helping to ramp down the tension in our street?
Absolutely. Social justice, equality. Nobody wants to be a drug dealer. Being a drug dealer is a short life. Yes. And we've done studies at John Jay of drug dealers. They don't get fabulously wealthy on that level. They leave. They go to prison. They get shot. They lease cars. They don't own homes. They don't own businesses. It's not a life anybody wants. You give somebody an alternative and a good job, and you'll have much less of that. And then you adjust how you see police officers. The idea that you see police officers as heroes that are going to save you from a rising tide of uncontrollable violence is the warrior message is wrong. That has to be changed. We have to recruit people that are there to make people's lives better. And it's your best weapon is your communication skills. It's not your gun. It's a different approach to policing. And this is not just my idea. This is widespread. This is what's going on. When the warrior mentality, heroes against villains, doesn't work.
Let's just, before we run out of time, we're with Professor Greg Donaldson from the John Jay College of Criminal Justice. The George Floyd Justice in Policing Act of 2021, passed in the House, still sitting, waiting to be passed, lowers criminal intent standard to convict a law enforcement officer for misconduct, limits qualified immunity as a defense to liability, grants administrative subpoena power to the Department of Justice in pattern or practice investigations. Do you see this kind of legislation as being helpful, or does it muddy the waters? And certainly the police unions are fighting back against qualified immunity, and that's become a political issue. What are your thoughts on that?
It's hard to see. A lot of these things sometimes have unforeseen consequences, collateral consequences that you don't foresee at first. But I think moving in the direction of a police accountability is the good way to go. And I would like to see how these things work out. It's not going to be where people are not out to prosecute police officers who are in good intent doing the job and making split-second decisions and trying to Monday morning quarterback them. That is not the intent of progressive police reform. It's to make police officers accountable who are crossing the line with impunity.
I do think that the blue wall of silence plays as well, because then when something like this happens, you don't see an immediate reaction or a truthful, like we saw in Memphis, a truthful response from the police leadership, because they're like afraid to get into it. But I think the people at those levels have to be strong and say, you know what, this was not right. This doesn't represent us. Let's take a very close look. We don't necessarily get that. I just want to conclude with this. I mean, the list is so long. I've already mentioned Amadou Diallo, Patrick Doris, Montonte Wright, Eric Garner, George Floyd. It's too sad to be believed. Breonna Taylor, Michael Brown. Are we, each time something like this happens, and I know we do programs on it, everybody says, well, now we're going to stop it. Are we ready finally to get our arms around this, to do the things that you've recommended? Is the police industry ready, the criminal justice industry ready to say, you know what, we got a problem here? Or do you think, unfortunately, it's going to perpetuate? What a sad thing to ask.
I think there's a potential that this could be an impetus for some real change like the George Floyd situation was. That's why the over-the-top protests that engage in violence themselves distract from that message. So for instance, if we're going to talk about training now, training that would have officers who are in a pursuit learn how to control the adrenaline, learn that it is not us and them, that the humanity of the person who is being arrested is extremely important. If we could train that and then retrain it, have them come in after a couple of years to go over this again, and then we can send a message that anybody who crosses that violates those principles will be prosecuted. I think that can be real progress. It's an opportunity, and we should see it that way. We have to keep up the message.
An opportunity. I think that's a great way to conclude this conversation. Professor Greg Donaldson from the John Jay College of Criminal Justice, thank you for your time. And your expertise is much appreciated during situations like this. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, I should mention that we recorded this, I said earlier today. It is February 2nd on Thursday. This will not air till the 6th, so just so you can get your timing straight. Dr. Lynne, very interesting interview. The one aspect which I saved for you, this was not a case, as it has been on so many others, of white police officers beating on black people. It was, in plain language, a black-on-black incident. Was race a factor in this? Many people say, well, they were black, so race was not a factor. How do you explain it?
Yeah, absolutely a factor.
It was a factor.
It was a factor. I infuriate people because, for the most part, they say, you know, why do black people in particular say everything is about race? Because everything is, because we grow up in a system of systemic racism that teaches us black people are criminals, or the face of criminality, right? And so when you look at the fact that black officers, they couldn't see themselves in him, I don't know who had sons, they couldn't see sons, anybody that they know and love, like they didn't see the humanity of Tyre Nichols. And so part of that, a big part of that, comes from how we are taught to see black people. And for the most part, we are, not even for the most part, we're taught to see them as less than human, certainly less valuable than white lives in the system that we grew up in.
And so in the training of a police officer, and we certainly don't know specifically how the Memphis police were trained, but one of the most striking things, and while we were watching, you reacted and I reacted the same way when he reminded us that Tyre Nichols, you know, they said that he was driving erratically. That wasn't even the case. Right. For whatever reason, something, and this is all, you know, we suspect, something inside of them said, let's beat on this guy. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know how else to explain it. And what you're saying is they perceived Tyre as being, you know, somebody who potentially was a criminal, or that's
absolutely less than human, less than worthy of being able to have a conversation with.
It is a very difficult issue to unpack and also to solve because it's so complex, and there are so many difficulties in trying to figure out right from wrong and not wanting to prejudge. But in this case, as you probably know, the police were quite taken to task for this terrible incident with Tyre Nichols. Well, in our final best of segment for the first quarter of this year, we're going to look back at a program we did about the New Majority NYC, an organization designed to keep the gains for women in the political landscape and then extend them into the future. Our guests were New Majority NYC Executive Director Jessica Haller and Councilmember Amanda Farías. I particularly liked the council members come back to me after I asked a question about fairness on the council from her male colleagues. You said that male-dominated council might not have understood this. It's, is it kind of, I don't know how to describe it. Is it because they just don't understand, or it never occurred to them? I mean, I don't think that anybody would be mean about it, so to speak, or prejudiced about it. It's kind of an organic thing, I suppose, is the way to describe it.
I think at this table you might be the best person to answer that, but generally, I
would have to be told about the seriousness
I
of it.
do
Yes,
think
maybe.
that, you do policy, you focus priority, yes, on community issues, but typically from your lens, right? So it's not to say that there aren't
Somebody
men.
was being evil about it.
Yeah,
I guess,
it's
is
not
what
to
I'm
say
saying.
that men are not focusing on
Thank
women
you.
and children, but it is to say that they're not experiencing it on the day-to-day, right? It's not happening to them wholly all the time. And so when you do have more women in office, you do see just a change a bit of, yes, we're talking about ensuring healthcare access, but we're also talking about what does birthing experience look like and why are doula services necessary? Or we have a year-long plus usually on gynecological services for women. How do we open up those doors? Things like that
Might not have been understood.
might not understood.
So your point of view about, is this, let's say, a leading issue for the group? I mean, is this one of the things that you put right up at the top of the list?
Many of our candidates and the women that we've supported are elevating this issue in the council today, and even some of the candidates who I know are not in council, this was one of their leading issues. The New Majority NYC supports candidates who demonstrate support for our bottom line issues. One of the things we've been talking about, issues that feel like women's issues, childcare, healthcare, reproductive rights, but we feel really strongly that a whole host, economic development, standing up against bigotry against minority people, justice in all forms, are all support women, right? If you don't have economic development, it's the women that are going to suffer from that.
I want to talk about this unanimity, so to speak. Does this, and the issues that you mentioned and the issues that the council member mentioned kind of lean toward progressivism, if you will.
They do.
But as you know, 15 council members just left the Progressive Caucus, including Marjorie Velasquez and Diana Ayala, both have representation in the Bronx. The issue is over police accountability and funding. Does this hurt the ability for New Majority to lay out a platform?
New Majority NYC is nonpartisan. In 2021, the organization endorsed 74 candidates in 35 districts, including a Republican. We've had Republican applicants this time around. You can be Republican and still demonstrate support for building a resilient New York City, and which is one of our bottom line issues, and still be a Republican and demonstrate support for reproductive rights in some respect. So we're often lumped in as quote unquote a more progressive organization, but the range of values in the women reflect the demographics of the districts that we are working with the women in.
Councilmember, how do you feel about not only having your colleagues leave the Progressive Caucus, but even just, let's digress a moment about this police funding issue, which is right in the center of the debate in the council right now?
Yeah, I think progressivism isn't a monolith, right? We each are elected by the body that's within the voting base that's within our communities, and we have to, be able to legislate and build budgetary priorities and communicate, really message our issues out to our local communities. And so, I think it's important for people to feel how they can best represent their community is how they can, do that through whatever caucus they're organizing out of. There are many caucuses in the council. We're a Democratic majority. There are other ways to organize outside of just caucuses. And in terms of the language that we have in Progressive Caucus about reducing the size and scope of the NYPD, the way I think majority of us view that is when we take examples in the PD budget, like moving traffic enforcement or school safety officers out of our schools and into the DOE, or out of traffic enforcement and into DOT, that's actually reducing the size and scope of the NYPD.
Without cutting a budget.
Well, it will actually cut budget as well, right? Because if we're moving whole divisions to other areas that are maybe more reflective of what they should be governing, it's actually streamlining the way that our precincts can focus in on the work that they need to do to keep our communities safe.
I guess ironically, just thinking back historically, that's what Rudy Giuliani did when he eliminated the MTA policing force and just made them regular city cops.
Exactly.
I want to ask you about another issue which is important to you folks, important of course to everybody in the Bronx, and that's the idea of universal pre-K and 3K. The borough president just the other day put out something which was very interesting to me. She called serious concerns regarding the ongoing crisis affecting community-based early childhood education programs, saying that they get unequal pay, they provide more versatility in times of care because it's not as structured as the DOE early childhood programs, slow rates of reimbursement. That the kind of issue that you think belongs on the new majority platform?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's been an issue that a lot of the women have been raising already, and we'll
You've
see.
heard about that.
Yes, absolutely. And we'll see reflected, I think, in the races that are to come and in the prioritizing from organizations like the New Majority.
I have to say, talking about issues that are personal to you, I went to a school like that. My mom was a director of a school like that, so I'm very familiar with that situation. That's why I raised it. What about the whole notion of education equity? I was blown away a few years ago when it was said that the New York City school system was the most segregated in the country.
Yeah.
That blew my mind.
Yeah.
You want to talk about how we address that and how the new majority takes a view of education equity?
So the new majority.
I want you to solve all our problems,
listen,
if you don't mind.
This is how I'm going to solve the problems. We're going to support the women who are best qualified and most reflective of the city, and they're going to solve the problems. We're actually not an advocacy organization.
That's fair. Okay.
Right? We're not advocating for progressive or left or center. Mm-hmm. We are elevating the voices of the women who are in their communities the most experienced to be able to do that. I mean, my question on school segregation is, that is the fact. Is it a good fact or a bad fact?
So what you have seen in this little mini look at the first quarter of 2023 are three different types of programs. I mean, the first one was an arts show. The second one was a very difficult show about a very difficult contemporary issue. And the third was about Bronx politics. And that's really what has characterized BronxTalk for all these 29 years. And it's been my pleasure to be the host. It's both the joy and the challenge of hosting BronxTalk every week because, the borough is so diverse and so complex. It's our challenge at BronxNet and, of course, on BronxTalk every week to try and capture that for the people of the Bronx. And so that will do it for our Best of BronxTalk for the first quarter of this year. We want to thank all of our guests, without whom, of course, we couldn't do this show. And also, of course, thanks to producer Rebecca Hemmick, the directors and crew for BronxTalk, and mostly you, the people of the Bronx, who give us a chance to talk about the best place in the world each week. So we will see you next week, and the week after, and the week after that. That's what we do. Have a good night.